I was thrown out as an extra mouth by my own son, 2 bags, no apologies. That night I found a rusty key and a binder that doesn't lie. Add 15%, call it beautification, a voice hissed on a recording. That's fraud, another whispered. I didn't scream. I sharpened my silence. At the meeting, I stood up and said, I'm not here to win, I'm here to correct. Then he rose my son, and everything I thought I'd lost cracked open. Want to hear what the tape revealed? Stay. I used to shelve silence the way I shelved books, spines outward, labels straight, everything in order, even when my heart was not. Driftwood Landing crouched under live oaks that braided light and shadow across the sidewalks. The clubhouse wore an egret on its door, a painted bird with blue legs and a watchful eye, as if it kept minutes better than the board. Morning smelled like marsh and coffee. I walked slow, listening for my husband's footsteps, catching only wind chimes and distant lawnmowers. Grief was a key without a lock, cold in my palm, useless and heavy. Ethan let me keep the spare bedroom while I got my bearings. Brielle called it a courtesy month, like a coupon with an expiration date. Their townhouse smelled like citrus cleaner and ambition. I folded towels the way she liked and learned the dance of their mornings, coffee first, then fitness shoes on the table like trophies. They were young enough to believe control was a vitamin. I made myself small, a guest in pictures I had paid to frame. The egret watched through my memory when I closed the door and counted breaths to keep from making noise inside. The slights were domestic and deniable. The TV clicked off the moment my show crested into feeling. A hand, not mine, rearranged the utensils after I washed them, spoons standing at attention like soldiers who no longer trusted me. A bill I hadn't created slid beneath my door with a yellow sticky note that read, "Due Friday," and a heart that felt like a wink. When I asked a question, Brielle looked at her phone. When I laughed, Ethan rubbed his thumbnail and stared past me. Their kindness wore calendar lines. Their patience frisked me for invisible debts every day. Dinner was chicken, a spreadsheet, and the sound of my fork trying not to scrape. Brielle scrolled and pointed at highlighted cells like a weather forecaster moving a storm. Utilities, groceries, gas, she said, tapping totals. Then she smiled without warmth and delivered the line that split the room. Brielle, we didn't sign up for extra mouths. The words sat on the table like a tipped glass. I set my napkin down. Me, you signed up for family. Ethan's eyes flickered, a lighthouse too far from shore to help. Ethan. Small. Mom, please. The plea dissolved into the spreadsheet's glow. The decision didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like a memo. Brielle folded the spreadsheet with ceremonial care and slid it toward me. We talked, she said, fingernail tracing the edge. It would be healthier if you could find something stable. The word wore perfume and a police badge. Ethan didn't contradict her. He stared at a water ring as if it might swallow him. I nodded because nodding felt safer than becoming a scene. The chair legs scraped like a judgment. Somewhere outside, a sprinkler ticked, counting seconds while my life shifted from guest to problem to departure tonight. I packed the way you pack when your life has already been emptied. 2 bags, the blue one with a stubborn zipper, the gray one that smelled faintly of library dust. I folded photographs face down as if they might embarrass me if they looked. The night air lifted the live oaks like curtains. At the Driftwood Landing sign, a moth kept hitting the glass, insisting on entrance. My phone died halfway to the bus stop. A small sun snuffed without ceremony. The I-16 budget motel flickered vacancy in red, a heartbeat I borrowed for one forgettable night and sleep. The room held its breath like I was a rumor. Wallpaper peeled in thin curls near the air conditioner. The bedspread was a geography of old irons and newer hopes. I washed my face in water that smelled faintly of coins and stared at myself under fluorescent honesty. Widow, mother, guest, problem. I didn't cry. Crying felt like asking permission from people who had already decided. I lined my shoes against the wall in neat little rows, as if order could earn me time. The vending machine outside kept swallowing change and humming anyway, like a sermon about survival tonight. I lay awake, counting the seams in the ceiling, wishing numbers could stitch a person back together. Somewhere a freight truck sighed into its brakes, and my chest copied the sound. I imagined the egret on the clubhouse door, unblinking, keeping better minutes than any of us. I pictured Ethan as a boy stacking blocks, the tower tremoring at his careful breath. Brielle existed as a perfume cloud and a clicking nail, moving columns more than feelings. Dawn bled along the curtain edge at last. I sat up, cold as a receipt. My tote waited, square and heavier than memory. I unzipped the tote, expecting tissues and a sweater. My hand found a hard corner and a surprised weight. I lifted out the HOA binder, fat with minutes and maps, and a rusty mailbox key on a bent brass ring. They must have fallen in during my last errand, when I returned a committee flyer to the clubhouse. Paper clicked like bones as I opened the binder. Names, votes, fines. Motions that died for lack of second. I felt the map of the neighborhood under my fingertips, each cul-de-sac a chapter I hadn't read. The key stained my palm brown. On my last morning there, I learned the thermostat had a password. The pantry shelves wore labels that moved my tea to a bin called guests, as if chamomile could threaten equity. My coffee mug disappeared and reappeared, scrubbed to a shine I hated, as if my lip had offended it. Brielle's planner lived open on the island, squares filled with pastel goals, none of which included me. Ethan's lunchbox thumped shut with the soft finality of a verdict. I wiped the counter until it reflected the ceiling light and thought, if I disappear neatly, maybe they will breathe easier. I carried the bags down the stairs alone because silence lifts more than hands. The neighbor's beagle whined through the railing as if it recognized a packing sound learned from other lives. In the courtyard, sprinklers tossed diamonds that vanished before landing. I looked up at their balcony and saw the herb boxes soldiering along, Basil obedient to the Sunday no one waved. I told the rideshare driver the motel's exit and kept my voice level, like spelling my own name on a form. He said nothing, which I preferred. Some goodbyes should be filed, not performed by anyone. I set the binder on the scarred desk and the key beside it, two small authorities glinting under buzzing light. The cover was cracked where fingers had worried it during other storms. I ran my hand across the table of contents, feeling the raised ink like braille for the newly invisible. A rulebook is just a story that insists on proof. Outside, a truck door slammed. Inside, my chest did not. I thought of calling Ethan and asking for one more night. The thought passed. I could raise my voice, or I could raise my hand. Tonight I would study. I turned to the first set of minutes and traced the date, the way I used to steady myself before reading to children at story hour. The binder smelled like dust and weather, a patient archive waiting for someone to notice. I leaned close so the buzzing light would stop trembling. "Tell me what's missing," I whispered to the binder. The rusty mailbox key nudged my wrist like a small animal asking to be useful. I closed my eyes and made the quietest promise I have ever kept. I will read. I will not beg. I will learn the door. I woke to the motel's hum and decided I would stop asking for mercy and start asking for minutes. Paper had never flinched when someone sighed. Paper did not roll its eyes. If this neighborhood worshipped rules, then I would learn the liturgy. I spread the HOA binder across the wobbly desk, anchored the corners with my shoes, and opened a notebook labeled with my own name. I wrote, "Decision. Choose paper over pleading." The words steadied me like rails on a staircase. Grief could have the night. Mourning belonged to clauses, definitions, and the small levers hidden in ink. Bylaws first. Definitions of common areas, curbs, fines, and the timetable for notices. Quorum thresholds. Language on special meetings. I copied sections into my notebook by hand because my hands remember better than my eyes. Where minutes listed a motion, I traced who moved, who seconded, and who let silence kill it. I highlighted phrases that sounded like handles: shall, must, within 30 days. I mapped the board, titles, terms, attendance patterns. The more I read, the less I bled. I brewed lobby coffee that tasted like coins and kept going, letting bureaucracy become music I could finally conduct for once. I walked to the municipal building because walking burns fear. The records counter sat behind glass and fluorescent patients. The clerk wore a nameplate that read Alma Ruiz. I slid a request form under the slot and tried not to apologize for existing. Vendor ledgers, landscaping contracts, payments for the last 2 fiscal years, I said. She studied me like a librarian judging a citation. I recognized the look. I used to wear it. She gathered binders with a rhythm that said, "I don't scare easily." When I thanked her, she shrugged one shoulder, half kindness, half protocol and procedure. She pointed to a workstation. "Computer seats are open if you prefer PDFs," she said. I told her I learned by touch. Alma smiled like someone who knows the weight of paper. She slid a ledger through the slot and tapped a column with a pen. "We don't hide records. We file where no one looks." The sentence unlocked a hallway in my mind. I read the vendor list twice, then again. Driftwood Greens, LLC. Amounts tidy, descriptions vaguer than fog. I asked for the corporate status. Alma typed, scrolled, and printed a page with a pale, damning stamp attached. "Dissolved," it read, like a gravestone wearing an exclamation point. Yet the HOA ledger showed payments to the same name this quarter, last quarter, the quarter before that. I copied dates into my notebook, hunched like a student cramming for a test about truth. Alma lowered her voice, not to hide, but to guide. "All public," she said, palms up, as if offering a staircase. The staircase led from suspicion to structure. If a vendor didn't legally exist, someone was laundering incompetence or worse through a pretty name. My pen dug into the paper, carving ruts I could follow later. I returned to the motel with copies that smelled like warm plastic and consequence. I drafted my first public records request properly, citing the statute numbers I had underlined, putting dates in a neat column and my patients in a second one. I requested minutes, check registers, bid requests, maintenance tickets, and emails that mentioned landscaping. I stapled everything square because the world listens better when the corners agree. While the copier chattered, I practiced saying the word quorum out loud until it lived in my mouth without wobbling. I whispered, "Proxies," like a password into a locked room for me. The next afternoon, I crossed paths with a man in a faded volunteer safety vest who moved like he still carried ladders in his sleep. He tipped his cap and introduced himself. Darius Kemp, retired firefighter, resident since before the oak roots pushed up the sidewalk. We stood by the mail kiosks, where gossip stuck like postage. He nodded toward the aluminum boxes. "Darius, folks confess at the mailboxes." He tapped a small black device clipped near his chest. "Body mic," he said, matter of fact. "On patrol, not sneaking. Keeps arguments honest." His eyes were tired, not suspicious. That mattered to me. He lowered his voice, the way people do when truth grows legs. "Caught something a while back," he said. "Young contractor, nervous laugh, treasurer pushing for a little extra here and there." He didn't say Brielle's name. I felt it anyway. "It's time-stamped," he added, patting the device. But I didn't know where to take it without turning neighbors into enemies. I nodded. I understood the particular ache of being correct too soon. "If paper is your kingdom, paper is my sword," I said, surprising myself with the steel. His mouth lifted at one corner, a retired flame waking slowly. I spent evenings at the public library where the air smelled like childhood and toner. I watched webinars on open meetings and read blog posts written by paralegals with patience for strangers. I diagrammed Section 6, Section 7, and the difference between a regular meeting and a special one the board couldn't dodge. I built a glossary: agenda, motion, second, table, carry. I counted board seats, then counted likely allies, then counted how many proxies I'd need to survive the chair's sigh. When the numbers didn't favor me, I sharpened my pencil and looked for another rule to hold on to. Back at the counter, Alma had a stack waiting like a staged photograph of accountability. Receipts clipped to stubs, check images with tidy memo lines, seasonal beautification, mail kiosk refresh. I traced the dates over the printed watermark and felt my pulse learn their rhythm. "This vendor status," I asked softly, "still dissolved?" She nodded and slid a second printout through. "Updated this morning." Her finger landed on the line again, unblinking. "Alma, we don't hide records. We file where no one looks." I thanked her and meant it. The sentence felt like a door left ajar for me now. I walked to the river and sat on a bench that had swallowed 1,000 confessions. I typed a message to Ethan. "I found something wrong. Are you okay?" I didn't hit send. I pictured the spreadsheet's glow and Brielle's careful smile and chose quiet like choosing shoes that wouldn't blister. Back at the motel, I circled section 4.3 inches red, proxies and special agenda requests. My handwriting looked steadier than my hands felt. If I gathered signatures, they couldn't say I was just a mother sulking. I would be a quorum in shoes, not a guest in their narrative. I drafted my special agenda request with the caution of a surgeon and the stubbornness of an oak root. I used full names, parcel numbers, dates, and the exact bylaw citation. I asked for 30 minutes on the next agenda for discrepancy reconciliation concerning landscaping vendors and minutes. Then, I printed a stack of proxy forms and tucked them into manila envelopes with sticky notes that said, "For owners who want fairness more than theater." I rehearsed a sentence for doorsteps. "I'm your neighbor, not a crusader. I'm asking for signatures, not sides. Truth deserves a room to stand in tonight." The first door belonged to a woman balancing a toddler and a mortgage. She listened, eyes darting between my face and the proxy line for signature. "I don't want drama," she said. "Neither do I answered. "I want audits and sunlight." She signed, then whispered, "Don't use my name on the portal." The second door belonged to a retired band director who handed me a pen before I finished my sentence. "I've been counting these weeds by tempo," he joked, then signed in 4/4. The third door didn't open. A curtain moved. I left an envelope without blame there. I returned to the motel with 3 signatures, a to-do list taller than me, and a steadiness I recognized from fire drills at the library. I labeled a folder Proxies and another Agenda. I labeled my courage and put it back on. I pressed the binder flat and drew a map from Discovery to Vote, Records, Allies, Meeting, Reveal. I set my phone on the bedspread, opened a new message to Ethan, and typed nothing. The unsent words glowed like a pilot light. Tomorrow I would walk doors. Tonight I would study. Tomorrow I would knock. Tonight I would sharpen. Tessa Bloom waited by the clubhouse ramp with a toolbox that looked heavier than her courage. She was small and wiry, a braid tucked into the back of her cap, knuckles chapped where wrenches write their own letters on skin. Her work order said electrical check at the mail kiosk, but her eyes kept slipping to the HOA office windows as if a glance could trigger a fine. I offered her a bottle of water. She took it with a tremor that made the cap click against her teeth. "You from around here?" she asked, like geography could decide safety. We stood under the live oaks where the air smelled green and patient. She opened her toolbox and pretended to inventory parts, but I recognized the posture of someone counting excuses to stay. "You can sit," I said, nodding toward the bench. She shook her head, then said, 10 minutes. We sat anyway, the quiet filled with sprinkler hiss and the distant metronome of a nail gun. She watched 2 kids push scooters across the parking lot and swallowed like a person planning a confession. "I'm not late on purpose," she said at last. "Hours got cut. Then the letters started." "Ah." I asked what letters. She pulled a rubber-banded stack from the side pocket of the toolbox and set them between us like surrendered weapons. Violation notices, friendly fonts with unfriendly totals, snapshots of tiny sins, a mop left visible in a breezeway, a van parked 1 tire into the grass, a hose asleep across a sidewalk for 12 minutes. She tapped the dates. "They know my schedule," she whispered. "Every Tuesday that I push back, Thursday comes with a warning. Every Friday I pay something, Monday adds a fee." She looked down. "I am tired of being taught how to obey." "Who asked you to push back?" I said gently. Her jaw worked like a rusted hinge. "The treasurer," she answered, avoiding the name that would sting us both. She said beautification costs what people expect it to cost, said, add a little cushion, no one will check, everyone wants the place to look good. I said that was dishonest. I said the numbers would not match. She smiled like a dentist and told me to be a team player. Tessa's breath hitched. "Every no earns another letter." The stack between us leaned, an unreadable monument in sunlight. I kept my voice level. Bullying with stationery is still bullying. Her eyes met mine as if to measure whether I would keep standing once the tide came in. "You talk like a teacher," she said. "I was a librarian," I answered. "Different desk, Same respect for order. She relaxed half an inch. I have something, she said, chewing the corner of her lip. I recorded one conversation. She sounded like a podcast about control. She slid her phone from a cracked case and opened the voice memo app. A file glowed with the date and the mail kiosk address, a digital fuse. I have not played it for anyone, she said. I was scared it might be illegal. I told her the rules about single-party consent in our state and watched fear move to the edge of her shoulder, still present but lighter. She did not hit play. I need to know there will be a room for this, she said. I need to know it will not make me disappear. I nodded toward the clubhouse. That room exists, I said. It has minutes and a projector and neighbors who are tired of paying for polish they cannot eat. The promise tasted like paper and steel. We walked a slow loop around the parking lot while she finished the electrical check. I handed her each small tool like we were baptizing our hands in competence. When the kiosk lights blinked to life, we both exhaled. She tucked the violation letters back into the toolbox but handed me photocopies she had made at the print shop. Just in case they visit me before they visit the truth, she said. I slid them into my tote behind the HOA binder and the rusty mailbox key, which chimed against the metal like a friend waking up from a long nap. That afternoon I began the neighborhood canvas. Driveways first, then stoops, then porches where wind chimes print small sermons on the air. I introduced myself as a resident with questions, not a plaintiff with a pitchfork. Most doors opened a limited distance, as if safety had a chain and manners held it. A man with paint on his wrists showed me a second pile of notices for seasonal bed refreshing charged during a drought month. A nurse on night shift handed me a copy of a late fee that posted while her autopay was active. Patterns emerged like footprints in wet sand. People whispered like the wind had ears. It is easier to pay, a father of twins murmured. I cannot risk a lien. An older woman patted the armrest of her porch chair and said, The board stopped answering my emails when I asked for receipts. A college kid renting over his aunt's garage described how the landscaping crew trimmed shrubs that did not exist behind their building, then invoiced for the work anyway. I took notes with the care of a medic, taping stories to ledger lines, matching dates to minutes, letting evidence braid itself into a thick rope. I carried proxy forms in a folder labeled with purpose. I did not push, I invited. I am asking for signatures, not sides, I said. Your name will count toward a vote demanding clarity. People hesitated, peered over their shoulders, then signed as if practicing a new courage. When the pen left the page, their eyes changed, lighter by ounces. I recorded parcel numbers and phone numbers, noting who wanted to be contacted only by mail. The proxy log grew line by line, a quiet chorus. By dusk, I knew the quorum target like a hymn and my progress like a prayer. After dinner hours, the HOA portal lit up like a stage. Brielle posted a carousel of policy blasts, excerpts from Section 7, bullet points about fines, crisp graphics warning of non-compliance. The tone was sugar-wrapped around a lecture. Community standards protect value, she wrote, and we will enforce standards without apology. Below the post, she answered questions with links to bylaws and a spoonful of condescension. My name did not appear, but the shape of my effort made a shadow. I screenshot every slide and saved them in a folder called Exhibits, where even fonts can testify in the end. The next post arrived with an image of a manicured lawn under a filter that made every blade glow. Beautification is not optional, the caption declared. Fees for additional services would be applied as needed to ensure a consistent aesthetic. I recognized the phrase from invoices, vague enough to feed any appetite and specific enough to terrify. I refreshed the page and saw comments disappear, as if questions could be composted into silence. I logged the timestamps. Policy can be accurate and still be rotten. When standards become weapons, neighbors become targets, and a neighborhood becomes a theater for power. I returned to the motel with a pocket full of signatures and a phone bright with screenshots. Exhaustion rode my shoulders like an uninvited child. I set the proxy log beside the binder and smoothed the pages until the edges aligned. The violation letters from Tessa lay on top, pale as fish bones. I added the nurse's late fee, the painter's drought month charge, the tenant's shrubless trimming, every small theft that hides inside politeness. I drafted a short statement for doors I had not yet tried. If you feel tired, sign. If you feel alone, sign. If you feel silenced, sign. Near midnight, I stepped outside to breathe air that belonged to no one. The motel ice machine clicked and hummed like a robot clearing its throat. My phone buzzed with a voicemail. Ethan's name glowed. I stood under the buzzing balcony light and let his voice wash over me without answering. Ethan. Hey, Mom. Working late. The pause held an old softness. He inhaled. I can stop by tomorrow. He exhaled. If you want. My thumb hovered over callback. I put the phone in my pocket and pressed my palm against the cool rail until my hand remembered patience. The next morning I walked streets I had never noticed, the ones behind the pool where the blue light makes water look kind even when it is cold. I met a teacher whose hydrangeas got cited for being the wrong hue, a barber who kept receipt folders like family albums, a woman who cried quietly when she showed me the door hanger that said "Final Notice" for an amount that could buy a week of groceries. Each conversation added a plank to a bridge I needed to cross. I kept names private and facts public, because dignity should not be currency when we speak. Tessa texted me a photo of her timesheet with a red circle around a supervisor comment. Please adjust labor to reflect community expectations, she added. They took an hour off my pay. I wrote the phrase in my notebook. Community expectations. It sounded noble and smelled like rot. She followed with an image of a second letter, dated the same day, warning of escalating measures if chronic untidiness continued. The photograph captured only an empty porch and a swept mat. She wrote, I was on site working. I filed it with the others and felt anger settle into purpose again. In the afternoon, the portal shifted tone. A polished graphic announced a Good Neighbor Recognition program with gift cards for helping uphold standards. It made me think of children rewarded for telling on other children. Below, Brielle posted cheerful responses to compliments and firmer replies to complaints, linking fines to education. Shadows lengthened across the sidewalks while I printed more proxies. A teenager riding past on a skateboard lifted 2 fingers in a silent greeting that felt like a blessing. I lifted my pen in return. The map in my head grew brighter at each signature, as if lit by small porch lights. By evening, my proxy folder held more weight than my fear. I spread the signed forms across the motel bed like a quilt sewn by strangers who wanted sleep without dread. I counted and counted again, then logged each name in the ledger I kept for myself. I added a new tab to my binder, Owner Testimonials. Under it, I placed brief summaries with dates, addresses, and amounts, and highlighted repeating phrases that proved a pattern more than a grievance. Patterns cannot be shamed into lies. They stand on their own legs and walk into meetings even if you whisper. I ended the night with the stack of violation letters Tessa had given me. Each paper felt flimsy alone and heavy together. I imagined Brielle's planner open on her counter, ink curving into power that pretended to be tidy. I wrote one last line across the top page of my notes. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking to stop paying for someone else's story. I tucked the notes between the binder and the key and exhaled until my shoulders remembered the shape of rest. Tomorrow would ask for more knocking. Tonight would ask for sleep honest enough to hold me. Robert's rules lived on my motel nightstand like a hymnal. I read motions aloud until the mechanics slid into muscle memory. Move, second, call the question, point of order. I practiced breathing through interruptions, practiced asking for the floor without raising my voice, practiced the quiet posture that says, I am here to correct, not to perform. In the afternoons, I walked to the clubhouse with my notes and listened to the room, the echo under the rafters, the hum of the vents, the scrape of stacked chairs. I imagined neighbors filling the space and kept drilling the cadence of clarity. Darius met me at the common room with a tackle box of cables and the grin of a man who could still wire a ladder by feel. He set the portable PA on the stage and tapped the mic once, then twice, like knocking on a stubborn door. Truth needs working speakers, he said, handing me the cord. We tested volumes at chair rows 1, 5, and 9. The feedback squealed once and then obeyed. He paced the aisles while I read a paragraph into the mic and heard my own voice grow steadier inside the treble. We color-coded the exhibits because confusion loves gray. Green for minutes, blue for invoices, red for discrepancies. I slid the tabs onto sheet protectors until the binder looked like a careful bruise. A neighbor volunteering as secretary-in-waiting watched me build the stack with librarian respect. "If they try to talk over you, point to the colors," she advised. I nodded and wrote "color saves confusion" across a sticky note for my lectern. In the margins of my outline, I penciled the order: minutes first, invoices second, discrepancies third, audio last. I wrote the word "calm" beside every transition arrow. When Alma called, I nearly dropped the phone into my coffee. A packet waited at the records window: purchase orders printed from the city system, ledger screens captured with timestamps, and a thin list of requests for proposals that didn't match the contracts. At her counter, she slid the stack through the slot without commentary. I scanned the pages and watched the first gap open like a quiet canyon, missing PO numbers beside large checks. Vague deliverables paired with tidy payments. "Alma," I said, throat dry, "does this track?" She tapped a column with the end of her pen and didn't smile. "Numbers don't lie. Users do," Alma said, and I felt the sentence latch into something metal inside me. We walked through one quarter, then the next, tracing a routine that pretended to be normal. Driftwood Greens LLC kept appearing like a ghost, paid for beautification enhancements, kiosk refresh, seasonal pruning, even in months when the minutes showed no authorized extra work. The board had voted on general landscaping, nothing more. Alma printed a corporate status confirmation with today's date: dissolved. I placed it on top of the stack like a headstone, then slid everything into blue tab sleeves immediately. Back at the motel, I created a slide deck titled Pattern, Not Accusation. First slide: agenda language exact, to respect the rules. Second slide: a simple chart with green bars for minutes, blue bars for invoices, red bars where they should overlap and didn't. No jokes, no captions that nudge. The visuals had to teach without snarling. I rehearsed the voiceover in a whisper. "These dates do not match. These approvals do not exist. These payments require explanation." I added a slide for the body mic audio, a placeholder with only a title: Mail Kiosk, recording time stamped. The font stayed calm. 2 days later, the HOA portal lit up like a parade. Brielle posted a glossy announcement: "Goodwill update." The graphic showed lavender banners and soft confetti. The text promised a goodwill contract renegotiation with the landscaping vendor and a limited-time fine amnesty for first-time offenders. The tone smelled like cupcakes. Comments rolled in grateful emojis, relief from people strangled by small debts. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. A part of me wanted to be relieved. Another part heard my husband's voice: "Look for the receipt." I clicked the attached contract and downloaded it to check the bones. The document bloomed open with neat paragraphs and signatures that tried to look official. I right-clicked the file, opened Properties, and read the metadata like a palm. Created 2 weeks ago. Modified yesterday. The announcement pretended to be responsive. The contract had been born before people complained. A staged responsiveness. I felt anger tighten into precision. I took screenshots of the property's window with the date and time, then exported the metadata to PDF, then printed it twice. I added red: metadata predates Goodwill announcement to my exhibit tabs, and slipped the proof beneath a clear sleeve gently. That evening, I carried a manila envelope to the clubhouse to review the projector input. Brielle came down the breezeway with her phone like a mirror and her perfume like a slice of citrus over ice. She paused as if we'd stumbled into a photo. "Oh," she said lightly, "getting your paperwork steps in?" I smiled because smiling keeps the air safe. "Yes," I said. "Walking counts as cardio." She tilted her head. "Some of us maintain standards." I met her eyes and measured the lacquer. "Some of us maintain records." The sentence made a small sound when it landed between us. We stood 5 feet apart, still as lawn ornaments, while the day cooled around the magnolias. She let her gaze drop to the envelope in my hands. "Filing something?" she asked, breezy. "Preparing for clarity," I answered. "Clarity helps everyone breathe." She laughed softly. "Everyone loves transparency until it shows their junk drawer." I could have told her about the file property's timestamps. I could have said, "Your generosity has a timestamp." Instead, I saved it for the room with minutes and chairs. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and walked on, perfume trailing citrus and certainty. Darius joined me for a final technology rehearsal. He unspooled cables like rope at a river rescue and checked the backup microphone he'd purchased with his own retiree discount. We labeled inputs and outputs with white tape and black marker: laptop, audio, spare. I handed him a sealed envelope containing a duplicate of the body mic file. "If someone knocks the laptop out," I said, "you can still play the recording." He nodded and slid the envelope into his tackle box, which he locked with a key he wore on a thin chain. "You thought of everything," he said. I practiced scared. Chain of custody mattered more than passion. I drafted a one-page statement for the secretary to sign when accepting the USB drive. Date, time, file name, hash value printed from a checksum tool so no one could claim edits. I prepared a second USB and labeled it Minutes Audio Exhibit. I taped it inside my notebook, then put a third copy in the toe of my shoe because paranoia is just experience wearing sneakers. Printed minutes went into green sleeves with page numbers, invoices into blue, discrepancies into red, the audio chain of custody sheet into its own clear protector at the front. I took a slow afternoon to trace the route from my seat to the lectern, to the projector cable, to the speaker input. I timed how long it took to pull the slides, reference a tab, and step back without tripping over the lip of the stage. Darius played the skeptic from row 4. "That font's too small." I enlarged it. "Can't hear the dates." I added them into the narration. "Say it slower." I rehearsed again. He sat in the back and closed his eyes. "Again," he said. "Pretend we don't want to understand and make us understand anyway," he reminded me gently. At the records office, Alma slid one more envelope across. Inside, a city memo noting that procurement over a threshold requires 3 bids or justification on file. Our HOA had filed no such justifications for several enhancements. I could almost hear the egret on the clubhouse door blink. "Careful with conclusions," Alma warned, "professional and kind." I nodded. "I'll ask questions," I promised. I added the memo to red tabs and edited a slide. Required bids versus filed justifications. No accusation, only arithmetic. I wrote a note to myself in the margins. Questions are hammers only if you swing them like one. The next portal post arrived like a paper smile. Brielle published a selfie video, all soft lighting and neighborhood pride. She spoke about listening to feedback and partnering with vendors to reduce burden. The comments filled with gratitude and light reprimands for negative people. I monitored quietly and updated a slide called Timeline. Portal posts versus contract creation. I felt mean, then remembered the bill slid under my door and the nurse charged during autopay. In the motel mirror, I practiced saying, "Your generosity has a timestamp," so the line would land like fact, not sting. My voice obeyed. On the Saturday before the meeting, I canvassed one more cul-de-sac for signatures. The sun baked the brick like fresh bread. A retired paramedic signed and said he'd attend if his knees cooperated. A college sophomore renting over her aunt's garage signed and asked if rolling eyes counted as dissent. I told her the rules: voices, votes, minutes. "Bring a friend," I added. By dusk, my proxy tally brushed the number I'd circled on my notebook weeks ago. Nearly there. I placed the signed forms in alphabetical order by last name and breathed like a person about to turn a corner carefully. I returned to the clubhouse after dinner with a thumb drive and my resolve. The projector accepted my laptop like a handshake. The first slide appeared, simple and plain. Darius sat in the back middle, the acoustical truth-teller's seat, and raised his hand at 2 quiet signs. We adjusted the amp until every syllable crossed the carpet. He made me rehearse introducing myself. "My name is Margaret, homeowner, parcel number." He nodded when the sentence felt like a foundation, not a plea. He made me rehearse thanking the board for the floor. "Respect is armor," he said. "Wear all you can. Beau." On my way out, I met Brielle in the breezeway again. The lemony air moved like polished glass. She glanced toward the common room. "Heard you're staging quite a production," she said, a little laugh tied to the end like ribbon. "We have a projector," I answered. "We have records." She tilted her head, performing concern. "Be careful, Margaret. You know how easily people misunderstand spreadsheets." I smiled. "I'll use pictures." She stepped closer, perfume a citrus dare. "You want to win." I shook my head. "I want to be correct." She blinked briefly. "Good luck," she said, already walking away. I spent Sunday labeling printed minutes with sticky flags for the chair and secretary, corrections highlighted, vote counts circled, missing motions annotated with a question mark, not an accusation. I wrote an opening statement on 2 index cards and practiced setting them down so my hands could be empty. In the motel bathroom, I ironed my blouse with the hairdryer and steam from the shower because care survives on ingenuity. I taped my husband's pocket square inside my binder where only I would see it, a quiet relic reminding me that tenderness and tenacity can share a pocket without fuss. Monday morning brought a small kindness. The neighbor secretary-in-waiting texted, "I can confirm time on agenda once proxies filed." My stomach eased. I walked to the HOA office and requested to submit the special agenda packet. The receptionist took it, eyes careful. I noted the time, the date, the receipt number, the pen color she used. On the way out, I paused by the egret on the clubhouse door. Its painted eye looked less like decoration and more like a witness. I touched the edge of the decal and whispered, "Stay with me," then laughed at myself because superstition is just hope wearing perfume. That afternoon, I tested the body mic audio through the PA at low volume. Door closed, Darius at the threshold listening for bleed. The recording sounded clear, mailbox metal echo, footsteps, voices. We checked battery backups, surge protectors, and extension cords. I added a slide with a single sentence about consent laws, sourced to a public website. Darius suggested printing the statute. I did. I also printed a short bulleted chain of custody explanation, each step initialed, each transfer noted. It felt like building a bridge over a ravine and reinforcing it with every scrap of steel we could find in the shed. Before dusk, I walked one last loop past the lawns. Some were newly perfect, as if the portal's optics had seeped into the grass itself. A boy practiced dribbling a basketball on a driveway while his mother watched with a tired smile. A wind chime muttered minor chords. I checked my folder again, proxies nearly enough to force the time, signatures neat, addresses correct. A neighbor waved from a porch and asked, "You ready?" I thought about fear and rehearsals and my shoe hiding a USB like a secret bulletproof vest. "Ready enough," I answered, and meant it with both hands trembling. When night settled, I lined everything on the motel bed, like a returning diver laying out artifacts. Binder with green, blue, red tabs, printed minutes, invoices, the metadata printout, Alma's memos, the bid justification rule, chain of custody sheet, 2 USBs, index cards, proxy stack, alphabetized. I opened my laptop and clicked through the slides again. The timeline showed portals posts lagging behind contract creation. The bid rule slide stood like a quiet door marked required. The last slide was a thank you, plain text, black on white, not triumph, not sarcasm. I closed the laptop, placed my palm on its warm lid, and breathed. Darius texted a final reminder, "Sleep, then show up." I set my phone on the binder, a small altar of electricity and paper. Outside, a truck downshifted on the highway, thunder without weather. I rubbed the heel of my hand against my sternum until the ache loosened. "You are not alone," I told whatever part of me preferred despair. The egret lived inside my eyelids when I lay down, blue legs folded, eye bright. Tomorrow would be choreography. Tonight would be stillness. I turned off the light and let the room hum without me while the plan held its breath safely. In the morning, I slipped on my blouse, my flats, my resolve. I tucked the USB-labeled Minutes audio exhibit into the side pocket and the duplicate into my shoe. I packed my bag like a paramedic, most urgent on top, backups mapped by touch. I looked in the mirror and practiced my first 3 sentences one last time. When I closed the door behind me, the air outside tasted less like anxiety and more like purpose. I walked toward the clubhouse under the oaks, slide deck locked, proxy threshold nearly met, a room waiting. A microphone ready, a quiet truth about to become audible. I found the notice tucked under my door like a party invitation with a rulebook heart. Mandatory renovations meeting, refreshments promised, glossy cardstock shining as if sugar could lacquer procedure. The egret logo smiled in the corner. Date, time, location. An RSVP line no one would use. I held it up to the window and watched the paper glow. Announcements wanted to be adored before they were obeyed. I walked to the office, filed my packet, and watched the secretary stamp the receipt with certainty that steadied me. Proxies assembled in their folder like little boats at a dock, names and parcel numbers aligned, signatures crisp as morning air. By late afternoon I had the quorum, not a rumor but a count, enough to demand agenda time by the book. I wrote the numbers on my palm and then on an index card, so triumph would not tempt into carelessness. In the restroom mirror, I practiced the opening sentence until the vowels stopped shaking and the consonants agreed to stand guard. I won't raise my voice, I'll raise my hand. The cardstock wanted celebration. The statute granted permission. The proxies created weight. Together they sounded like a door unlocking. On the walk back, my phone vibrated. Ethan's name lighting the screen with an ache I felt in ribs. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then slid my thumb away and watched the call tip into voicemail. His voice arrived softened by distance, as a man stepping around glass he cannot see. Ethan said on voicemail, "I made a mess." He cleared his throat and added we should talk about the budget, about Brielle, about everything he wished were smaller. I stood under a live oak, let the leaves filter the sun, and kept promise to protect the room, not the rumor. I typed a heart, then deleted it, then breathed until the old need to fix him dissolved like sugar in tea. "Some of us clean them," I whispered, giving the words to the shade instead of the phone. I filed the voicemail under later and filed the proxies under now, because priorities are also a kind of shelter. When I reached the mirror again, I repeated the sentence that felt like armor and patience stitched into one fabric. The meeting would feed cookies, but the bylaw would feed time, and I intended to use each crumb carefully. Brielle turned the portal into a pulpit. A banner appeared with Section 7 cited in bright blue, bullet points marching like tiny bailiffs. She attached a schedule of fines, a warning about liens, and a link to educational resources that read like scoldings. The post ended with a sentence meant to slam the door gently. "We will enforce standards without apology." The comments filled fast, half clapping, half pleading. I took screenshots and saved the timestamps. Rules can be clean and still be dirty. The letters looked crisp. The intent smelled like bleach. I brewed coffee and steadied my hands. Her ground game arrived with frosting. She worked the sidewalks with a box of cupcakes and a smile engineered for thumbnails, filming polite nods for her curated stories. Door after door, she told neighbors the community had to be vigilant against disruptors. She never said my name, but she shaped the air around it. I listened from porches down the block and took notes on the phrases she repeated: protecting value, setting a tone, nipping problems early. Sugar can carry bitterness farther than salt. Children waved at the cupcakes. Adults signed small surrenders with napkins. I kept walking. At midnight, the portal sprouted a reel where she posed beside the mail kiosks and narrated a tour of eyesores in soft focus. I watched it once and recognized the angle that made an ordinary broom look like defiance. The caption paired a heart with a gavel emoji. I closed my phone and counted to 30 so I would not argue with a screen. In the morning, I printed copies, highlighted her citations, and added them to the blue folder of invoices and the red folder of discrepancies. If she wanted theater, I would bring a ledger. Screenshots cannot argue with minutes. The motel slid a notice under my door announcing a rate hike. The paper did not apologize. My hip ached when I stood, a quiet reminder that bodies are ledgers that charge interest. I counted the bills and understood the arithmetic of goodbye. I walked to the pawn shop with my wedding ring wrapped in a tissue. The stone turned inward as if it wanted privacy. "Fair price," the clerk said. I nodded and did not take the last look people regret later. "You kept your promise. I'll keep mine," I murmured to the ring, and slid the receipt into my binder. I filled a thermos with coffee and canvassed again, carrying calm like a tool. The disruptor's label trailed me like perfume I had not chosen. On a porch with wind chimes, a woman asked if I wanted war. "I want receipts," I said, and she passed me her violation letters for beautification during weeks her husband had been hospitalized. A painter showed me invoices for mulch spread on beds that were gravel. A retired teacher taught me to pronounce the name of a shrub I had never seen trimmed and handed me a proxy. Patterns set their chairs at my table. At the bus stop, the world narrowed to a pane of glass. Ethan stood across the street, staring at a cracked bus bench ad for personal injury lawyers, as if it could argue with fate. He held his phone like a fragile fruit. I could have crossed. I could have pretended we were two strangers sharing shade. The light turned green for him and red for me, even though neither of us moved. A gull screamed over the intersection like a referee. We both stayed still until the buses came, and the moment left us behind, unclaimed, like coins in couch cushions. The portal stung again that evening. A Q&A with firm clarifications, a phrase that dressed rules in velvet gloves. She explained that liens were standard remedies, that additional services might be added without advance notice to preserve harmony. People praised her leadership in comments that read like resumes. I kept collecting signatures and stories. A contractor's apprentice texted a photo of a trimmed hedge with a caption that said, "No hedge here." I saved it. Photo proof is a stubborn witness. I added the image to a folder titled Pattern because naming helps me carry it without shaking. I considered the timing and wrote an anonymous note. I kept it short so fear could not chew the edges. I printed a single line on plain paper and folded it around a flash drive that contained a 40-second clip. The envelope had no return address, only the treasurer's name and a stamp. Inside, the snippet captured a calm voice asking for an added percentage to meet expectations and a small, wavering refusal. I sealed the paper with my thumb. On the front, I wrote, "Check the minutes." I dropped it at a blue box 3 neighborhoods away and walked home. The next day, neighbors whispered that the walls in the treasurer's townhouse had learned to shout. A text reached Darius from the unit next door while he watered his fern. "It's getting loud." He forwarded the message to me without comment. I pictured Brielle's planner slammed shut like a trap and Ethan's thumbnail scraping a new groove into itself. I told myself to care and not intervene, a balance that stings. I carried another stack of proxies to the kitchen table and alphabetized them until my hands slowed. Control is sometimes an arrangement of papers that face the same calm direction. After dinner, I walked past their building on my way to the mailbox. The upstairs light was a rectangle of accusation. Voices pressed against the glass, not words yet, just push. A minute later, the shape of a sentence broke free as if the vowels had torn through tape. "Don't touch my phone, Brielle." The air held still afterward, as if the trees wanted to hear the next line, and it refused to be born. I kept walking until my feet were past my feelings. The mailbox key turned stubbornly, then surrendered like a person who just remembered their manners. Brielle posted again, a square collage of before and after shots with the edges softened, so weeds looked villainous and sidewalks looked heroic. She thanked volunteers, praised vigilance, and reminded the community that eyes open keeps property values strong. I printed the collage because the hush of a printer grants me small dignity. I added the page to red and wrote in the margin, "Optics are not outcomes. The portal cannot show you auto-pay fees posted while a nurse sleeps after nights. The portal cannot show you a painter arguing with drought. It can only decorate the truth and sell it." The motel's ice machine coughed, and the vending machine swallowed my last quarters without apology. I considered buying another night or another dinner and chose time. Time would matter more than salt. I brewed tea with water from the tap and sat with my binder open to the slide, where I would say, "These dates do not match." I thought of the ring behind a pawn ticket and the hip that would ache through the meeting and the son whose voice had turned soft with fear. I reminded myself that compassion does not require surrender. I stacked exhibits and practiced breathing. Cupcake diplomacy continued. I watched from the shade, while Brielle kneecapped doubt with sugar and hashtags. A neighbor who had signed my proxy the day before accepted a cupcake and then texted me a photograph of the wrapper with a single question mark. I replied with a picture of the statute requiring bids above a threshold. No commentary, only the line highlighted. She texted back, "See you at the meeting." Another neighbor forwarded a portal message where questions had vanished between refreshes. Screens can tidy reality faster than brooms. I wrote the times down and filed them under vanishing voices. Darius checked the speaker again and handed me a little pouch with spare batteries. "For luck," he said, and then corrected himself. "For redundancy." We stood inside the empty room and listened to the vents hum. He looked toward the ceiling like a man remembering smoke. "If she starts a speech, wait, then show the slide," he advised. "Do not rush. Let the room catch up." I nodded and imagined the path from seat to lectern again. I imagined hands rising like small flags. Outside, clouds collected above the river, gray and large and patient. I stacked exhibits and breathed. The dock held the night like a quiet parent, boards cooling under my feet while the marsh breathed in and out. I brought a pen and an index card and wrote 3 words that shook my hand steady: "Do not rescue." I set the card on the bench so the moon could read it too. The tide answered in syllables I pretended were law. I pictured my son's face and slid the card back into my pocket before tenderness turned into permission. "Boundaries aren't punishment, they're truth," I whispered, and felt the sentence settle my bones like a careful splint. Back in the room, the binder weighted open to sections I'd already underlined into comfort. Section 6.2 spelled out audio admissibility during member comment or new business, when relevant to correcting minutes or clarifying expenditure questions. I copied the language by hand, then typed it into a 1-page reference with the source at the bottom like a tiny anchor. Section 9.1 covered emergency motions added to the agenda by supermajority or by documented harm. I didn't want emergency. I wanted ordinary procedure doing extraordinary work. I built a checklist that could survive panic: call for agenda item, present minutes, show invoices, show discrepancies, introduce audio, request audit. Chain of custody sat at the top, underlined twice. I generated a checksum for the recording and printed the hash. I wrote an intake line for the secretary to sign when I handed over the USB: date, time, file name, hash value, witness. I sealed the drive in a labeled envelope, then sealed a second one with a duplicate. I added sticky flags to each tab: green for minutes, blue for invoices, red for mismatches, and practiced flipping to each without looking down. The theatric temptation whispered. I answered with order. The room would already have enough temperature. I would bring a thermostat made of paper. I tested my voice against the wall and practiced the cadence I wanted: slow enough for grandparents, clean enough for teenagers, firm enough for people who confuse certainty with volume. I practiced pausing after the phrase, "These dates do not match," so the silence could consider its options. I practiced thanking the board in a tone that could not be misheard as sarcasm. I practiced looking at the neighbors who had signed proxies so they would feel the vote standing behind them like a hand on a shoulder. I practiced breathing at the podium and not gripping the edge like a lifeline. Close to midnight, I laid out 2 outfits and chose the quieter blouse, one that did not ask for admiration or apology. I ironed it with steam from the shower and patience from childhood. I checked the projector cable again in my head, the path from laptop to speaker to witness. I placed the index card on the nightstand so I would wake to instruction instead of panic. In the corner, the motel chair held my tote and my binder like a friend guarding my sleep. I turned the ring pawn ticket over, then back, then slid it in behind Exhibit A. Sleep found me, then left. I woke at 2 a.m. to a knock that didn't sound brave. I sat up and stilled the bed before rising. The frosted glass showed a familiar silhouette, not tall enough to terrify, just known enough to break me. "Mom?" The word stayed outside. "I'm scared," he said through the door, and the hallway swallowed it. I pressed my hand to the card in my pocket and felt the ink through the paper like fresh stitches. I stood there breathing. Compassion pulled my shoulders forward. The outline of the door pulled them back. He knocked again, softer. I spoke to the air, not loud enough for the hall. "So am I. We still show up." I waited until his shadow withdrew, waited until the elevator sighed, waited until my hands stopped shaking without permission. I did not open the door. I did not fail either. I wrote the time down on my checklist only because writing helps me survive the hour. Then I made tea in the microwave and read Section 6.2 again, line by careful line, until the rhythm of admissibility covered the ache behind my ribs. The card stayed in my pocket. The bench inside me stayed firm. Morning tasted like metal and resolve. I printed the formal agenda request packet again, this time with a cover page listing every exhibit and a short summary. Audit motion requested to reconcile vendor payments with minutes. I walked to the office before opening, stood in line behind 2 polite complaints about trash pickup, then handed the packet to the receptionist with a neutral smile. She stamped the receipt with a thud that traveled up my wrist. I wrote the time on the top page, then emailed a PDF copy to the official address and CC'd Alma with the subject line, "For the record." Walking back, I rehearsed my first sentence with the egret decal looking over my shoulder. I stepped into the restroom and looked in the mirror. The blouse behaved. My hair obeyed enough to pass. I held my own eyes and said it aloud once so the vowel shapes would behave later. I won't raise my voice. I'll raise my hand. The sentence did not ask for permission. It offered a standard. I folded it neatly and put it with my index card. I wanted to say it to Ethan too. Today, I would say it to the room that could fix what hurt. At the motel, I opened my laptop and polished the slides one last time. I increased the date font. I added a bracketed citation under the consent law. I swapped a busy chart for a clean timeline with 3 marks: contract created, portal promise, minutes untouched. I saved the deck and exported a PDF backup. I copied both files to a USB labeled minutes and sealed it in its envelope with the checksum printed inside. I copied them again to a second USB and wrote minutes duplicate in blue ink with a line under it like a promise pressed twice. I stood on the bathroom mat and tucked the duplicate USB into a small plastic bag, wrapped it in tissue, and slid it into the toe of my left shoe. It pressed against my foot like a secret that wouldn't let me forget what mattered. I walked a few steps to test the fit and adjusted the tissue until it didn't complain. This wasn't superstition. It was insurance. If the lights went out or the power tripped or a tantrum found its way to the table, the truth would still have a road. I laced my flats, looked down, and nodded to the absurdity. I checked the chain of custody sheet and signed my portion in black ink, then placed a sticky note for the secretary. "Please sign on receipt." I packed spare pens, spare batteries, and copies of the statutes in a folder marked LAW so the volunteer parliamentarian would feel respected. I ate a banana like a ritual because shaky hands make sloppy justice. I called the library and left a thank you on the general voicemail for being open late yesterday. Gratitude turned the 4 walls of the motel into something less temporary. Then I sat very still and practiced smiling without leaking anything sentimental. A message from Alma arrived. Received. Good luck. All public. I closed my eyes and let the 3 words gather inside the hollow places. I imagined the city records room like a spine, holding the neighborhood upright whether the muscles cooperated or not. I pictured Darius carrying his tackle box of cables like a medic's bag. I pictured Tessa practicing her own sentence in a parking lot, hands shaking the way mine used to when I read to children during story hour. Courage isn't loud. It's paperwork turned into posture. I put my shoulders back and my binder in my arms. Outside, the morning wind pressed against the flag by the mailbox-lined courtyard, a murmuring cloth that sounded like advice. I sat on the dock one last time with the index card pressed flat under my palm. The river pushed past the pilings with stubborn quiet. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're truth, I said again, this time to the water and the wind and the little blue legs of the egret inside my memory. The words did not make me feel brave. They made me feel correct. I stood when the sentence no longer needed a companion and walked toward the meeting. On the way, I passed 2 neighbors arguing about recycling bins. Their voices softened when they saw me, embarrassment making their posture careful. "Big day," one said. I nodded. Not a general, not a martyr, just a woman who had learned how to open the right page. At the clubhouse door, I placed the envelope with the USB labeled "Minutes" into the secretary's hands. She signed the intake line I'd prepared without commentary. We tested the file for 10 seconds, sound at a whisper, the hash value printed beside us like a quiet witness. The projector light warmed, and the room breathed. Outside the windows, clouds pulled a thin veil across the Sunday. Inside, chairs thudded into lines, and the coffee table gathered cookies. I stood at the back and felt the duplicate USB against my toes, a small pressure that kept my spine aligned with my promise. I held the index cards and did not shuffle them. I watched Brielle move through the room in a bright dress meant to photograph well. I watched Ethan come in late and take a seat far from the front. I breathed with the vents. The agenda sat on a lectern, and the hour turned toward witness. Coffee steamed at the back table like stage fog, and the room moved with the slow choreography of folding chairs dragged into rows. Neighbors warmed paper cups, then warmed their courage, then settled with the small coughs people make when they hope to sound neutral. I stood near the door where the light from the courtyard made a pale rectangle across the carpet. In my hands, the proxy folder fanned open like quiet teeth, names aligned, parcel numbers precise, signatures measured. I counted once, twice, not for triumph but for steadiness. The projector hummed. The egret decal on the door stared like a witness. The board took their places with the briskness of people accustomed to being obeyed. The chair tapped a pen on the lectern, called us to order, and began the script. Roll call. Old minutes. Updates no one would remember tomorrow. I listened for my line the way a reader listens for a beloved sentence, waiting to feel the words rise in my chest before they left my mouth. Darius sat mid-back, the sound seat tackle box under his chair like a first aid kit. Ethan slipped in along the side and chose a chair 3 rows behind me, eyes lowered. When the chair asked for new business, my hand rose before my heart remembered fear. Under Section 4.3, I said, voice level, I request the special agenda item submitted with proxies and receipts stamped at the office. The secretary looked at me, then at the stack I offered. She counted with the practiced calm of someone who likes math more than mood, thumb sliding pages like a card dealer. A small nod, then a louder one. Validated, she announced. The word felt like a key turning. The chair sighed, a soft instrument, and gestured to the lectern. You have the floor. I walked forward with my binder and my index cards, not a crusader, not a guest, just a homeowner with colored tabs and a duty to the minutes. I'm not here to win, I'm here to correct. I let the sentence sit, not coy, just clear. The first slide bloomed. Green bars for minutes, blue bars for invoices, red where they failed to meet. I named dates. I read amounts. I spoke slowly enough that grandparents could write and teenagers couldn't yawn. The second slide, checks to a vendor marked active on our ledger but dissolved on the state registry. The room leaned forward. Alma's printout appeared on the screen, the word dissolved sitting above the vendor name like a headstone. A neighbor murmured. I did not fill the murmur with my voice. I advanced to the third slide, the metadata window, the little box that tells the truth about when a file was born. This contract's creation date predates last week's goodwill announcement by 2 weeks, I said. Your generosity has a timestamp. The projector threw the dates onto the screen in numbers large enough to be undeniable. The chair adjusted his glasses. On the third row, someone whispered, so it was staged. I returned to green, minutes that did not include approvals for enhancements billed at premium rates. I returned to blue, invoices that charged for shrubs that did not exist and kiosk refreshes on days with no work orders. I returned to red, the overlaps that should have been there and weren't. I did not raise my voice. I raised the picture. Brielle shifted in her seat, phone face down, jaw tight. She lifted her hand. As treasurer, I can explain. We'll come to responses, the chair said, remembering the script, perhaps grateful to have one. I nodded at the lectern, not gloating. Next exhibit, I said, turning to the audio chain of custody sheet. I described the checksum and the sealed handoff to the secretary. I asked the secretary to initial the form on the screen, and she did, pen scratching like a witness oath. Darius stood only long enough to pass the speaker through the secretary's hands first to avoid any accusation that the chain was theatrical. He plugged the cable we had labeled AUDIO and sat down again, arms crossed gently, a man ready for smoke even when there might be only steam. The chair glanced over, resigned, then gestured for me to proceed. I watched the room's shoulders climb and then made my voice simple. We'll play less than a minute, I said. It is time-stamped at the mail kiosks. He nodded. I pressed play. The speakers breathed the metallic echo of the kiosk shelter. Footsteps. A small exhale. Then a voice, bright and managerial, airy and consequential at once. Add 15%. Call it beautification. The answer, smaller, carried the tremor of a person trying to keep employment and self-respect in the same pocket. That's fraud. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the slide, numbers that do not know how to lie. The recording ended. Silence held the room like thread through a button, pulling us into one tense garment. I did not look at Brielle. I looked at the chair. I request a correction of minutes to reflect the lack of authorization for enhanced charges, I said, and I move for an independent audit of vendor payments for the past 4 quarters. The chair cleared his throat. We will take comments. He aimed his pen toward the audience as if he could control the weather. A hand rose near the aisle, then another. The first speaker was Tessa, toolbox left by the wall. She walked to the front with a posture I recognized from my mirror on bad mornings. Her eyes shone, but her chin held steady. She told me to pad invoices, she said quietly. Every time I said no, a letter arrived about something small. She lifted photocopies of the violation stack, page edges soft from too much touching. I have a recording too. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Brielle. She kept her gaze on the chair as if the furniture mattered more than the faces. I just want to work without being told to lie, she added, breath-catching. Brielle stood then, fast and loud. Those clips are out of context, she said. We ask vendors to meet community expectations. Aesthetic standards are not fraud. She smiled at the room the way you smile at a toddler throwing peas. In fact, the goodwill contract shows our responsiveness. From the side aisle, I heard Ethan's chair legs scrape. He rose without looking at me. His voice shook and then remembered itself. Stop talking to her like that. The sentence hung between them like a thin, tight string. He didn't sit. He didn't move closer to me. He simply stood. The chair blinked twice and rediscovered his role. We'll restore order, he said, tapping the pen again. Comments noted. He looked at me and gave the tiniest nod a person can give without being accused of choosing sides. We have a motion for an independent audit, he recited. Is there a second? A hand shot up at once, then another, then 3 more, as if the question itself were a switch. The secretary recorded parcel numbers. I tried not to grip the lectern. Outside, a wind pushed against the glass. Inside, pages turned as people looked for reasons to stop pretending. Brielle attempted one more trench of persuasion. An audit is expensive, she warned. It will raise dues. I kept my eyes on the slide with the bid justification rule and the blank spaces beneath it. Or it might save money, I said, not unkindly, by showing where it already went. She opened her mouth, but a neighbor in a baseball cap, the band director, spoke first. I want receipts, not reels, he said. All at once, the room breathed in a new pattern. The chair called for hands, arms lifted around me like saplings reaching for Sunday. The secretary counted in careful tens. The chair looked down at the spreadsheet on his clipboard, then out at us as if surprised by our shape. Motion carries. He said it like a man who had expected different math and was relieved the room would carry the arithmetic without him. Someone clapped, just once. He lifted his palm, and the clapping stopped, then started again, softer, respectable. He cleared his throat. We will engage an independent auditor and report findings at the following meeting. We will also place the treasurer's position on the next agenda for a confidence vote. The words sounded like furniture being rearranged in daylight. I thanked the board for the time. I thanked the neighbors for showing up. I thanked Tessa for speaking in a room that had too often asked people like her to be grateful in silence. I did not thank Ethan, though my heart did in secret. I closed the binder and stepped back from the lectern so the projector light could stop warming my shoulder. The secretary's pen moved like a small violin bow, fast and final. Darius exhaled with a noise that made me think of smoke finding the open sky. Someone passed me a tissue in case I needed to cry. I didn't. Brielle sat down slowly, as if the chair might fall away at the last second. She stared at the screen where the metadata slide still waited, box of dates bright as noon. Her mouth opened, then closed, then smoothed into the expression of a person deciding which story will travel best online. She reached for her phone, then thought better of it. The chair reminded her that phones should be silenced. The room chuckled, polite and tired. I saw, for the first time since the night of the spreadsheet, that her certainty could tremble. Not collapse, not yet, but tremble. Neighbors lined up for the mic to offer brief comments. A nurse who had been charged during autopay, a barber who kept receipts like saints, a mother who wanted fines to teach, not punish. The chair set a timer and, to his credit, enforced it. No one shouted, no one cursed. We made an order from our disorder. When time ended, he looked to me again. "Any closing?" I shook my head. "The documents are with the secretary," I said. "The recording remains available for auditors." I paused, not to dramatize, but to let the air cool. "Thank you for listening to Dates." As people stood, the murmurs softened into the small civil sounds of a room that has made a decision. Chair legs, a cough, paper slipping into envelopes. Tessa passed me, toolbox in hand. Her eyes were wet, but her nod was steady. "I'll send my recording," she said, and I nodded back. Ethan lingered at the edge, neither coming near nor fleeing. Our eyes touched like two fingers through glass. "We're done hiding," he said, quiet enough that the sentence belonged only to us. I said nothing aloud. My ribs answered anyway, loosening like a door whose hinges have finally been oiled. I gathered my binder, accepted the chain of custody form back from the secretary, and watched the signature ink dry. The chair murmured to the parliamentarian about next steps. Darius locked the tackle box. Alma, present in the back row and unseen by most, lifted 2 fingers from her lap in a hello that contained approval without theater. I returned the gesture. Gratitude, not victory. The projector cooled, fan whir casting a breeze across the lectern. The egret on the door, when I looked back, seemed to have seen all this before and remained, patient as paint, neutral and kind. Outside, the courtyard felt bigger. Wind moved the live oaks in long, slow bows. I leaned against the railing for a second and breathed. The proxy folder now copies for the record was thinner by inches, thicker by meaning. Behind me, voices resumed their small talk. Ahead of me, the path to the parking lot shone with a recent sweep. I tucked the duplicate USB deeper into my shoe, habit refusing to relax too quickly. Across the lot, Brielle stood alone, phone dark, expression calculating. She opened her mouth to a neighbor, then closed it, then walked toward her door without turning back. When I re-entered to retrieve a forgotten pen, the secretary was already annotating minutes with ferocious care, arrows to corrected entries, brackets around votes, asterisks for exhibits. "These will be clean," she said. "They will be clear." I thanked her, then placed my index cards in the binder pocket like returning birds to a quiet nest. The chair glanced up. "Thank you for the civility," he said, perhaps to me, perhaps to the room that had finally refused to be decorative. "We'll contact the auditor this week." I nodded, kept my voice ordinary, and walked out into the blue-leaning light. The door closed behind me with the soft thud of furniture returning to its square on the rug. A breeze lifted the edge of the meeting notice still taped to the glass. The egret's eye caught a strip of sun and flashed. For a moment I saw my husband's pocket square folded inside my binder, the way grief and order can hold hands when no one is watching. The storm would come later, emails, spin, the reach for control, but for now the room had spoken. Brielle was speechless. The room exhaled. The minutes were annotated. And I walked toward the evening, lighter by law. The board reconvened a week later in a smaller room, the kind used for baby showers and tax clinics. There were no slides, no gasps, only paper and voices that kept their collars buttoned. The chair read the auditor's engagement letter and, without drama, called the confidence item. Hands rose as if pulled by a tide we had all felt for months. The secretary recorded the tally. The treasurer's seat, once cushioned by charm and momentum, was empty before the gavel touched the table. Removal passed. Interim controls adopted. Signatures gathered. A second motion followed like good housekeeping. Refer the matter to the city for procurement review. No applause. We stacked chairs quietly, as if noise could make us superstitious. The city clerk's letter arrived on heavy paper that smelled faintly of toner and starch. It summarized preliminary findings from documents we had already seen. A dissolved vendor still receiving checks. Missing purchase orders beyond the de minimis threshold. Invoices that repeated vague phrases without measurable deliverables. A final paragraph, careful and dry, used the phrase, embezzlement indicators. Another cited procurement violations, subject to restitution and administrative penalties. The letter did not accuse a soul, it accused a pattern. An auditor from the outside firm asked for access to mailbox camera footage and contractor schedules. Alma stamped the copies and slid them back, eyes kind, mouth neutral, reminding me again that institutions speak best through paragraphs. Lawyers prefer doors that close softly. Brielle came with counsel to a plain conference room, signed a restitution agreement that mirrored the math, and initialed a non-disparagement clause that would keep the portal tidy. No cameras. No statement beyond the minimum required by statute. She handed over treasurer keys, badges, passwords, a box of files that smelled like lemon and denial. The interim treasurer, a retired accountant with ocean patience, counted the petty cash and nodded. When it ended, people left in pairs, not packs. Consequence had been converted into paperwork, which is where I wanted it to live. I walked past the clubhouse afterward and listened to the air relearn its ordinary size. No one cheered. The egret gazed as always, painted neutrality steady as law. I realized how badly I had not wanted spectacle. Spectacle feeds hunger but starves change. We had minutes. We had votes. We had a plan that could be audited. I pressed my palm to the decal and promised to keep choosing rooms with chairs and cords and signatures, not corners with whispers. Justice, when it is healthy, becomes boring. 2 evenings later, Ethan knocked on my motel door with a paper bag of groceries and the posture of a man learning to walk again. He set the bag on the counter and pulled out bread, soup, a carton of eggs, as if provisioning a small ship. "I should have come sooner," he said. I kept telling myself it was complicated, as if that were noble. He stared at his hands. I co-signed a loan for her without reading the terms. The sentence broke something brittle in the room. "Who am I without her?" he asked, voice low. "An honest start," I answered, and the words did not tremble. We ate soup that tasted like relief and salt. He told me about notices he had hidden in drawers, about a savings account that vanished while he was busy defending optics. I told him about the index card by the dock and the rule that saved us from tantrums. He nodded like a student who finally understands the homework. "I thought love meant cheering," he said. "I forgot it also means telling the truth before the roof caves in. We washed the bowls together, like old times, only quieter and better." I moved out of the motel within a week, into a narrow shotgun cottage with a porch that blinked at the river. The landlord handed me 2 keys and a smile that did not pry. I bought a second-hand table, 3 chairs that did not match, and a clay pot for tomatoes because hope needs chores. In the clubhouse storage closet, I measured shelves and labeled bins to build a tool library in my husband's name, hammers, stud finders, a level that promised fairness. When a neighbor asked why names mattered, I said, "I won't rewrite the past. I'll annotate it." She laughed softly and signed up for Saturday checkout hours. On opening day, we loaned a ladder to a widow who wanted to change a porch bulb without calling anyone. We loaned a socket set to a young couple whose sink sang at midnight. We replaced the label that said MISC with one that said, "We'll find it." People returned the tools with small stories attached, and the board, to their credit, added a line to the budget that made the library official. The room smelled like cedar and second chances. I began a Saturday class in the common room called Know Your Bylaws. We brewed coffee and read out loud like a choir. Teenagers came for extra credit and stayed for the thrill of understanding. A grandfather corrected me gently on quorum math and left with 3 proxy forms for his cul-de-sac. The chair attended the second week, sat in the back, and admitted we had been sloppy with reserves. We drafted a transparent reserve policy together, 3 bids above a threshold, plain language notices, monthly reports posted without spin. When the motion passed at the next meeting, the applause sounded like rain on a tin roof, soft and right. Darius visited the tool library with a paper bag, the color of grocery stores in old movies. Inside lay a spare body mic, the same model he had worn. "For the neighborhood watch," he said, and then shook his head. "For training, not for spying. We wrote a policy together. Recordings created only during patrol briefings, not citizen encounters. Storage controlled by the board. Public release allowed only with a vote and a purpose." He pinned a printed copy to the corkboard and grinned. "I prefer hoses," he joked, But if wires keep us honest, we'll use wires with rules. We posed for a photo holding the policy, not the device. Brielle's exit happened the way bad weather leaves, not with a curtain call but with a pressure change. The portal announced a transition in neutral tones, thanked her for service, and signed off with a line about focusing on family. A moving van arrived on a weekday morning. Boxes traveled the stairs without the drama they had carried down others' throats. She did not knock on my door. I did not wait for it. Someone said she had taken a job 3 cities inland, where lawns behave differently. I wished her better mentors and better math. The mailbox kiosks looked the same as ever, aluminum and forgiving. On my walk, I picked up a wind-blown flyer for cupcakes and dropped it in the recycling, where sugar labels are supposed to learn humility. I ended that season where it had started, at the dock, with the marsh breathing like an animal that forgives you for not knowing its name. The index card had grown soft at the corners, but the ink still read like a compass. I set it on the plank, then put a stone on top, not to trap it, only to keep the wind from making choices for me. I spoke to the water the way I used to speak to shelves before opening the library. I won't rewrite the past, I'll annotate it, I said again, and River agreed by moving. Silence isn't emptiness, it's aim. The horizon held steady. I closed my eyes and gave myself the last permission I had withheld. I forgave myself for staying, for leaving, for learning late. The tide took the rest. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart even a little, that's our greatest joy. If you'd like, please share your thoughts in the comments. We'll keep bringing you stories that stay with you, so please consider subscribing to the channel. See you in the next video.